All right, folks, we're now at our 7 o'clock session for the evening. We've had just a great number of speakers so far tonight, and it's only going to get better here. At 7 o'clock, we have a real special guest for us tonight, a mental performance coach from South Dakota State University, Mr. Kris Kracht. Kris, go ahead, take it away.
Well, thanks, Brian. It's a pleasure to be with everyone tonight, and it's an honor for those who may be joining us at a later date and time as well. Via the on-demand. And I want to thank Brian and everyone with Intentionally Grounded for this opportunity and really for this platform to talk about a topic that I think really should be at the forefront of sport and youth development. So as Brian said, I do serve as the mental performance consultant for South Dakota State University football. Oftentimes I'm referred to as a mental performance coach, a mental strength coach, sports psychologist. And legally in the state of South Dakota, I cannot call myself a sports psychologist because I do not have a degree in clinical psychology, which was really intentional on my part. So I intentionally got trained in applied sports psychology so that I could be able to train coaches and student athletes on the theories that drive high performance, but then distill that down so that we would be able to apply them in a sporting context. So in this case, in the context of football. And I would say that I have two primary roles of responsibility with the South Dakota State University football program. My first primary responsibility is to help coaches and student athletes think right in sport. So every athlete has a range of ability. And my job is to get that athlete to perform more consistently, more optimally at that upper range of their ability. But I'm also clear to point out that everything that we're talking about in mental performance, while applied on the football field, it's a transferable life skill and will transfer from the football field to the boardroom or to the doctor's office or to the classroom or to the pulpit, whatever their chosen profession may be, whenever their career in football may end. And the second role that I have is to really weaponize their brain. And so we think that if we can train our players at South Dakota State, it gives us a distinct advantage, a competitive advantage over those teams that may not be choosing to train their student athletes mentally. And we know at the Division I level that the margin of victory is so narrow that something's got to be that difference maker. And so we think that if we can weaponize the brain and give our student athletes another weapon in their toolbox that allows them to deliver their best when their best is required, when it matters most, and especially when it's difficult, then we think that we've got a distinct advantage within our program. So basically what we refer to it as is called the championship mindset. And I'm just going to share my screen here. Maybe. I'll get to the right one here eventually. So we talk about it as a championship mindset. So really, what is a mindset? I think that's the first thing that we need to talk about. And a mindset is nothing more than a repeated pattern of thinking and behaviors that's wired into the brain based upon our thought life. So the brain is like a muscle in the sense that we can change its shape and its form based upon what we choose to feed it, okay? And so it's nothing but protein patterns, right? And the brain has neuroplasticity, so we can change it based upon our thought life. The problem is that we're all wired from the time we are born to actually be negative. So we've got to spend time systematically and intentionally rewiring, retraining our brain to have that championship mindset. So here's my question that I sort of ask every coach is, I always ask them, what percentage is your sport physical and what percentage is mental? And when I mean mental, I mean things like confidence and how to handle pressure, how to deal with failure, how to stay poised in those big moments. And then I ask the coaches, and I even ask the athletes, I want you to write it down. What is the physical and what's mental? And the majority of time in all of the exercises and all of the workshops that I do, Athletes and coaches alike will all say that their sport is way more mental than it is physical. So let's just say a coach says it's 40% physical and 60% mental. I say to them, okay, in a given week, right? In Division I football, it's 20-hour work week. What percentage of that time do you spend on the mental training? Again, on things like confidence and pressure and how to handle failure and poise. And to a man, most of them say 0, 5%, maybe 10%. And so my argument is that whatever that percentage is for you, let's just say it's 40, 60 again, that means you're leaving 60% of your ability, 60% of your team's ability in the locker room because you're not intentionally training the mental side of the game. I happen to think that it's 50-50 because if it was more mental than physical, then I should be probably playing on the PGA Tour. I should be in the Olympics. I should be in Major League Baseball because I've got the mental side down since this is what I do for a living, but I don't have those physical abilities or some of those genetic abilities that you have to have and hone in order to be a high-performing athlete. So there's no right or wrong answer to it. I just happen to think that it's 50-50. The point being is, do you have a systematic and intentional way of developing that mental side that so often is said to be higher than physical? I think of building an athlete a little bit like you build a table, okay? And a table's got 4 legs. The first leg of that table is the physical training. You as coaches and as athletes, you spend all of your lives training physically, how to get bigger, faster, stronger, more explosive. The second leg is the technical. Football is a technical game, and every position has different techniques that are required to be successful, and it takes special time and a lot of time to train that technique. The third leg is the tactics of the game. So the X's and O's, the in-game strategies, the game situations, the late game situations, down and distance, what we do on this formation based upon what our opponent does, all of these tactics that go into play into the game. And as I said to our team last week, I said every Division I football program in the country, just like every high school football program in the country, is training physically, technically, and tactically. There isn't one team in high school or one team at the Division I level that's not doing that. Some are doing it better than others. Some are doing it differently than others, but every team is doing that. We think at South Dakota State, the fourth leg, the leg that gives us that competitive advantage, is the mental side. And if you take away that fourth leg, we know what happens to the table. It crumbles. Just like the athlete crumbles when the lights are bright, when the pressure's on, when it matters most, because all of that physical and technical and tactical training doesn't come to fruition. So I don't care. You might have the physically strongest, fastest athlete there is. You might be the most technically sound linebacker in the country. You might know the game inside and out. But if on game day, your brain looks like this, looks like a junk drawer, which my guess is if I asked all of you, do you have one of these junk drawers at home? Everyone would raise their hand. Right? We all have a junk drawer at home. The problem with the junk drawer is we know there's something useful in there, right? Like we know that pair of scissors is in there, and if I dig deep enough, maybe I can find it. But the problem with our junk drawer is there's a lot of useless crap in there. That just like on game day, we've got a lot of useless thoughts kind of roaming in our head, going back and forth. Just like in our junk drawer, we got a lot of useless information. And we can't find what we need. Just like we can't find that skill, that physical, technical, and tactical skill that we've built, because all of these ineffective thoughts are up here that aren't allowing all of that training to actually come to fruition. So we've got to perform with clarity. That's where confidence comes from, is clarity of mind. We've got to organize that junk drawer. We've got to take out those things in the drawer that are useless, organize the things that we know are purposeful, so that we can allow all of that technical, physical, and tactical training to flourish. I would say the thing that makes our program the most unique at South Dakota State is a build-it approach. And so too often, people like me are called into programs when a coach says, I've got this head case that needs to be helped. Or this kid over here, he's in a slump. Or, gee, our team blew a 21-point lead in the fourth quarter of the semifinal game that cost us a chance to go to the national championship. Can you fix it? And we view this very much differently than a fix-it approach. And we think of it a lot like strength and conditioning. So right now, our guys at South Dakota State are going to strength and conditioning 4 days a week, right? And they go to see the strength and conditioning coach, not only when they feel weak, they go there 4 days a week right now to get faster, bigger, stronger, more explosive. The same thing is true in mental strength. They go see the strength coach to get their bicep bigger, but they come see me to make their brain stronger, to lift weights with their brain. And so just like we shouldn't just go to the doctor's office when we feel sick, we should go annually for maintenance. We tend to think of mental strength training a little bit like prehab, right? Rather than rehab. In other words, I don't want to find out when the pressure's on, when the lights are the brightest, when it matters most, how my guys at South Dakota State are going to perform. I don't want to find out in that moment. I want to train for that moment. So I don't know if I believe in this whole mental toughness, to be real honest with you. What I do believe in is either you're trained or you're untrained. And I like to say at South Dakota State, our guys are trained for that moment. We're not going to wait until we get sick in order to get better. But here's what we know from research. There isn't one coach that's watching this that doesn't have a systematic way of developing their athletes physically, technically, and tactically. Every coach has a system for that. They're intentional about it, and they're never going to leave it to chance. But we also know from research that most coaches do not have a systematic, intentional way of going about teaching life skills like mental strength. And too often what we leave it to is we sort of roll the ball out there on the field, and we think by sheer observation, by modeled behavior, by experience, by proximity, that our guys are somehow going to develop things like how to deal with failure, how to be poised in those big moments, how to deal with pressure, how to deal with their negative self-talk by just simply gaining it from experience. And we also know from research, that's just not simply true. So if you would never leave the physical, the technical, and the tactical to chance, then why would we leave mental strength training to chance? To find out in that moment, I don't know, is our guy trained? Is he not trained? Can he handle this big moment or can he not? Let's not leave that to chance. Because at the end of the day, this is what I think every coach is after, right? Every coach wants consistent, on-demand execution of learned skills when it matters most. And when it matters most is on game day. And if we can't train to have consistent, on-demand execution of those learned skills, then we have a team that's comprised of a lot of great practice players that can't perform when it matters most. But we've got to train the mental side in order for us to have that consistent on-demand execution of learned skills when it matters most, when their best is required, when it's most difficult. We've got to train systematically for those moments. Here's why that matters. On any given day, the average human being, just the average person, is going to have 80,000 thoughts a day. That means 60,000 thoughts a day are negative. And that means 60,000 opportunities every day that your thoughts are preventing you from showing up as the best version of you, the best coach, the best teacher, the best husband, the best parent. Because of your thought life, 60,000 thoughts that we have on an average day are negative, are preventing us from showing up as the best version of us. So let's break that down into football. That means in an average football game, you're going to have about 15,000 thoughts. So that means you're going to have 12,000 negative thoughts in a football game. So 4 out of every 5 thoughts are going to be negative. 9 out of 10 thoughts are on repeat. So if you say to yourself, I cannot cover this guy today, he's too fast for me, that's on a loop in your brain on repeat, kind of like the song that you hate the most. It's just on repeat all the time, playing over and over and over in your head. And you're wiring that negative line of thinking right into your brain. And now that's going to impact your performance unless we train how to deal with those negative thoughts. Because let's be honest, coaches, your athletes are going to have negative thoughts on game day. They're going to have negative thoughts on practice days. They're going to have negative thoughts in games. It's going to happen. That's just the realistic version of how this plays out. The question is, have we trained our student athletes to deal with those negative thoughts? Do they actually listen to them? Or do they know what to do with those thoughts when they come and still, despite maybe how they feel, deliver a high performance? That's a trained skill. Because here's what we know from research. In research, it says that our thoughts impact our emotions. Okay, so it impacts how we feel, which impacts then our physical being or how our body feels those emotions, which then ultimately impacts our performance. So let's take the example of a defensive back. If a defensive back says, I can't cover this guy, he's just too fast for me and he's too big. Now my emotions might be one of anxiety, one of fear, one of doubt. And the way that I might feel that in my body is my breathing might get real shallow. My heart rate's really going to elevate. My chest or my shoulders might get tight. My legs might feel like they are in quicksand, and my field of vision actually will narrow. And now that's going to drive a lower level of performance. So if we know that our thoughts are one of the primary drivers of high performance, then why aren't we taking the time and having a systematic, intentional way of training our thoughts in order to deliver a high performance, just like we take the time and have systematic ways of training our athletes physically, technically, and tactically? The problem is I hear coaches yell all the time at their players, focus, right? They tell them to focus, but they've never trained their athlete how to focus. I hear them tell their athletes, be positive. You've got to be positive. Yet we've never taken the time to actually train our athletes to be positive. And this goes back to our hunter-gatherer days. We have a negativity bias. We as a human species are wired to be negative. And when you think back to hunter-gatherers, everything was dangerous to them. Every person, every animal, the environment. And so their brains were always searching for danger because everything was viewed as dangerous. And that's been wired into our DNA to the point now our brain is always scanning for danger because the brain's number one job is to keep us safe. That's its sole primary purpose, is to keep us safe. And in one sense, that's awesome. We need that, right? It prevents us from doing a lot of stupid things. For example, if I put my hand on a hot stove, my brain's going to tell me to take my hand off so that I don't burn my hand. The problem is that also then translates to the football field. So let's say your field goal kicker has a 35-yard field goal, 2 seconds left in the game to win the game. Your brain thinks it's dangerous. It thinks it has its hands on the stove. So what do? We rush our pre-kick routine. We don't go through our normal process. Now we start having these negative thoughts. Our heart rate elevates. Our body gets tense. And now we hook the ball to the left. We miss the field goal and we lose the game. All because our brain thinks that that's a dangerous moment, because the brain doesn't know the difference between a perceived threat and an actual threat. It thinks the hand on the stove and this pressure moment in a football game are equally as dangerous. So we've got to train the brain to understand what's a real danger, like me holding a gun to your head, and what's not a real danger, a 35-yard field goal or 4th and 1 at the goal line, whatever that situation may be. The difference is our brain thinks it's dangerous because it just wants to keep us safe. We've got to train for those moments. We can't just leave it to chance. Here's what LeBron James says about what it means to be mentally fit. He says it means presence. No matter what I'm doing, my attention is locked in. It means awareness, so I can see my surroundings with clarity and I can calculate my options. It means calm and composure in those big moments when the pressure's on. It means resilience. I face a setback and I show up the next game, the next quarter, the next possession. And there's a great video right now circulating of LeBron James where he's in a timeout. I think it was last week. Might have been against the Knicks late in the 4th quarter. And you can see him in a timeout on the bench doing some deep breathing and basically doing some meditation. That's because LeBron James spends roughly $1.5 million on his physical body and his mental well-being. He is trained for those moments. That's why he can feel calm and be mentally fit and feel calm in those moments. So now, how do we go about doing this, right? How do we go about having a systematic, intentional way of training our student athletes? And I just want to start with giving you what I think are some best practices and ways that you can go about doing this. The first thing is just get your ankles wet, right? It's kind of like that pool that's kind of gradually as you go in. You don't need to jump into the deep end immediately. Most of you don't have probably the money, the resources, the access to a mental performance coach like SDSU football does, is that you can bring someone in like me to help you, right? And maybe you can, but just get your ankles wet. And I would just focus on 2, maybe 3 mental strength concepts for the year. I would start real small and real simple. Just simply get wet. You don't have to go all the way in the deep end on this. Second, I think you should have your sessions be more often and have shorter sessions. I say no more than 5 to 15-minute sessions. So our sessions with our guys here at SDSU during the season, they're no longer than 15 to 20 minutes when I do weekly team sessions. During the off season, when I do weekly team sessions, they're no more than 30 minutes. And when I meet one-on-one with guys, they're anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes. So I think if you have more sessions, they're higher in frequency, but lower in duration, I think that's most successful. I would change locations. Have some sessions right on the field. Sometimes I speak with the team right there on the field, right after practice or right before practice. Maybe in the locker room. You can do it in a classroom. The brain likes novelty. So whatever you can do to change the location, I think is an added bonus. And so sometimes just to change it up, I'll do it right there on the field. Immediately following practice. I think the most important thing is that you embed it into practice. You make it a part of that practice day. So you don't add it on or tack it on at the end of the day. They don't have to come back at night or come in on a Saturday to do this. And so it becomes to be something extra. It just becomes part of what they do. So our guys, they come to mental strength training, just part of their practice day, just like they go to strength and conditioning, just like they go to film session, just like they go to their actual practice. It's just part of what we do on a Tuesday during game week. And so we embed it into what we do. And because we embed it in what we do, not only does it give it importance and give it credence, I think you also get greater buy-in from the guys because it just becomes a part of what they do. I'd make it application-based, right? The more we can give them exercises and make it application-based in the moment, and get them apply it to the game of football immediately, I think it's more likely they're actually going to take these skills from, if you will, the classroom to then actually on the football field. And that's why I'm embedded in the program. So I travel with the team to every game. I'm at every practice. I'm at usually every coaches meeting, every team meeting. I sit on position meetings or offensive, defensive meetings. So I'm embedded and I have the autonomy and the authority to work with guys right there in practice if I see something that I think they can improve on mentally and say, hey, we talked about this. Maybe it's something related to body language or their self-talk as an example, and really make it application-based right there in the moment. The last thing is your language. Let's face it. These are young men, young boys, and they're playing a hyper masculine sport. And anytime we start using the word mental, it automatically begins to sometimes perpetuate that fix-it approach. They think it's about sitting on someone's couch and spilling their guts, and they don't want anything to do with that. And so I think if you can refer to it as mental strength training, as high performance training, or as mental toughness, I think you're going to get greater buy-in, and it's going to do more to no longer perpetuate that fix-it approach versus a build-it approach. We had a guy that transferred in here from a Power 5 university. And he said, I didn't know what to think about you at first, Kris, because at the previous school I was at, we had a guy like you, but we went to that guy to get punished. That's where we got our punishment, was from our mental strength coach. And so I'd never heard about it in a build it framework. I'd only ever heard about it in a fix it framework. Something must be wrong with me. When guys come and see me at SDSU, it's because they want to get a competitive advantage, just like they go and see an academic advisor or a strength coach or their position coach to watch more film. So here's how I would do it, right? And let's just take the concept of self-talk, which is probably a concept that I would start with first. And I would do it over 4 different periods, if you will, right? Period 1, I would refer to as a warm-up, right? Again, I'm using terms that athletes are familiar with. I'm trying to put it into the context of their sport. So that mental warm-up might be giving them a handout that has the definition of what self-talk is, along with the different types of self-talk. So effective, neutral, ineffective, or positive, neutral, and negative. Then I might explain, why does self-talk matter, right? Just from hearing this presentation, you should be able to go back and tell your teams why self-talk, why mental performance matters. And then I would just give them some basic examples, right? So they can begin to say and identify with and say, yeah, I use phrases similar to that a lot when I play football or at practice. So they can begin to become aware of their thought life and I identify what thoughts are serving me that allow me to show up at my very best, and what thoughts are not serving me that are not allowing me to show up as the best version of me. The second period I would refer to as technique. Let's give them some actual techniques, just like you give your guys techniques based upon their particular position, to help them have a better thought life. And I would just start with some simple affirmation statements, right? So what's their ad campaign? What is it that they're saying to themselves when they take the field? So when I ask student athletes, what's the first thing you think of when I say Nike? Immediately, without hesitation, without thinking, they say, just do it. So if I say Pierre Strong, going to be an NFL draft pick, he should have a just do it affirmation statement immediately that he says to himself, that starts with I am, that's powerful, that's purposeful, that reflects the person that he wants to be. I am a winner, right? Might be an example. Then I would teach them a refocus phrase, or what I refer to as next play speed, right? They're going to make mistakes in football, right? If we play 70 snaps in a game, we're not going to have 70 perfect snaps. So our ability, not so much to focus in a game, in my opinion, but our ability to refocus is of critical importance. And that starts with my self-talk. What do I say to myself after a mistake? What is my refocus phrase so that I can have next play speed, so that play 5, whether it was good or bad, just becomes a neutral play and it doesn't impact play 6. I might write win on my wrist that stands for what's important now. I might write NPM squared, which is something one of our guys writes on his wrist on our team, which simply stands for next play matters more. So again, I'm giving them some techniques that they can use in the moment to refocus, to have that next play speed. The third period would be practice, right? I might create a worksheet that simply says, think of a time when you played at your best. What were you thinking? What were you saying to yourself? Then think of a time when you didn't play so well. What were you thinking in that moment? And then have them go back and like replay that and think of their self-talk and reframe it and say, okay, if I would go back and redo that and replay it, what could I say to myself now that would change that outcome? Would it change how I felt emotionally, which would have changed how I felt physically, which would have then changed my performance? What is a thought that I could have used to elevate a higher level of performance as I look back on it? And maybe you talk about today's practice. I oftentimes like to ask guys immediately after practice, what were you thinking on that play? I noticed you had a rough 5 and 6 periods were pretty rough for you during one-on-ones. What was going on in your head? What were you thinking in that moment? Or maybe you just got done playing Friday night's game or a game on Saturday and you're meeting on Monday and say, okay, let's go back to Friday night's game. What were some of the things that we were thinking in game that worked for us? What were some of the thoughts that we had that weren't working for us? And just really, again, to get them to be aware of and reflect on their thought life to see how it's truly impacting their performance. And then the fourth period would be what I refer to as a film session. So again, all football players are used to watching film. I would find video clips or testimonials or images of Division I football players, of NFL football players, of coaches that are talking about how they use, in this case, the concept of self-talk at their level. So for example, there's a video of Aaron Donald and his self-talk routine that he went through before the Super Bowl. It's a great video to show guys that say, look, maybe the best defensive player in the game right now, one of the best of all time, has earned all this money. He's got to tell himself how great he is every game in order to show up at his best. If it works for him, then it's probably something we ought to invest in at our level. I might find testimonials, right? Or images. So there's a great image right now. It's on my Twitter if you want to go look, circulating of Odell Beckham. And on Odell Beckham's mirror, he had all kinds of things written leading up to the Super Bowl that said, I will be a Super Bowl champion. I am a winner. I am loved. As a daily reminder of his own self-talk. So every day when he looked in the mirror and he brushed his teeth and he did whatever he does to his funky hair, he was reminding himself of that ad campaign and repeating it over and over. Again, a mindset, repeated pattern of thinking, wiring that into his brain that he was going to be a champion, that he's a winner, that he's loved. Thinking about what he wants to have happen rather than not thinking about what he doesn't want to have happen. That's a mindset. And he wrote it on his mirror. And again, what it tells these guys, particularly at the high school and at the college level, if it works for these guys that are some of the best at what they do, then it's proof that it works and it can work for you too. So as we usually say, good science makes good sense. These are just some of the things that I think that every athlete should be really training themselves on. We just talked about effective self-talk. I think every athlete should learn how to concentrate. Concentration is a skill. Focus is a skill that we can learn. It's a complex skill, but it's something that we can teach our athletes, and it's comprised of many components. And they've got to learn what those components are so that they can concentrate on what matters in a game. I think it's important to learn emotional regulation, intensity control. How do I stay composed in those big moments? How do I handle pressure? How do I view a big game like when we played for the national championship or when we played North Dakota State to win the Missouri Valley Conference? How do we handle those big moments? Our program, we do a lot of visualization. We do a lot of imagery work where we see ourselves being successful. We play the game in our mind. So when the game happens, we've already seen it happen in our mind first, in images, in sounds, and then it happens second, actually on the field. And we want to train for those moments. And so we spend a lot of time on visualization. Confidence is a choice. It's not a feeling, right? And it's something that we can train again. But have we trained our athletes how to be confident? Routines. Do our athletes have intentional, systematic routines that drive daily habits that drive high performance? How do we handle failure? They're going to fail a lot in a game like football. How do we deal with those kinds of setbacks? And then finally, what's our mental preparation for competition. Every athlete has a physical routine that they go through before the game, right? Every team has a physical routine that they go through for the game. But what's your mental routine? You might be physically prepared to compete, but if you're not mentally prepared to compete, that's when that table begins to crumble again. We've got to have a routine to get ourselves mentally prepared to compete at the highest level. And my experience is that most athletes have given that little to no thought. And there's got to be great intentionality behind that. So at this point, I'm happy to take some questions here in a moment. I just thought I'd share my contact information. If I can be of help to you, if I can come speak to your team or help you learn about mental performance, then you can take it back to your team and share those concepts with them, like a to and through the coach approach. I'd be more than happy to entertain that. There's my email, my Twitter handle, and certainly my phone number. If you just want to call or text me, you certainly can get in touch with me. If you're going to be here this summer, maybe on campus for one of our individual camps or our team camps, I will be there some of those days as well. I'd be happy to talk with you at that time as well, because it's something I'm passionate about. And all of this knowledge and mental performance does no good unless we actually get it out into the people that are using it on a day-to-day basis, and that's coaches. It's much easier for me to train coaches than it is to get to every athlete in the country, if you will. There's too many athletes and too few of people like me, but we certainly can get through the coaches and to and through the coaches so that they can begin to teach these concepts to their teams. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that there might be at this time.
All right, Kris, first question that we got from one of our coaches is related to kind of creating a little bit of sense of bravery in your players. This coach kind of talked about how they have a lot of kids in their school district that they feel just simply don't play sports because they're too afraid to fail in front of their peers. And so his question is, how, or do you have any strategies for how to train players to be willing to put themselves out there and perform?
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest barriers to high performance is our fear of failure, 100%, right? And the bigger the goal, right, the more likely it is that we're going to fail, the less certainty there is, right? So when I said to our team when we were playing for a national championship, that's big time. I can't predict with certainty how that's going to happen. And because there's so much uncertainty, there's a higher level of fear of failure that can set in. And so we've got to teach our players, how do we deal with failure? And I think part of that starts with coaches in sharing with their athletes their own failures, right? When we go into gymnasiums, we go into stadiums, all we ever see are banners of championships, right? This conference championship, this state championship, this national championship, whatever it may be. We never see the banners or the stories, those failures that led to those championships. And so I always tell athletes, ask your coach. I challenge you to ask your position coach, what's their biggest failure in life? And if we are more open about the failures that we've had in our own lives, because they think we're perfect too, then I think it gives them greater permission to perform and say, okay, I can still perform despite maybe failing, because I know that I have a safe place in which I can go to talk about this. And I think we just got to view failure differently. We view it as this plague, as something to avoid, like it's some illness that we have. And so we don't have a healthy view of it. And I think it starts with viewing failure as a growth, as an opportunity to learn. So as I say to our guys all the time, no matter what, win or lose, there's only winning and there's learning. And quite frankly, either way, there's only learning. No matter what, we're going to come back and we're going to get better. If we win, we come back, we get better. If we lose, we come back and we get better. But in my opinion, the only time that we truly lose is if we don't learn from that opportunity. How would we grow, right? If we never failed, we wouldn't know how to grow if we never failed. And so part of it stems a lot from, which is certainly popular in education, the whole growth mindset literature, setting up opportunities for our athletes to fail, right? And then talk about what that failure is like. So in practice, we should make things hard. We should make it to the point where they're going to fail sometimes, so that we give them experiences and how to handle failure. I think too often, as educators, as parents, we're kind of like servers at a restaurant, right? We want everything to go perfect. We want everyone to enjoy their experience. And so we don't ever allow them to fail. Therefore, they've never developed the tools to actually handle failure in the first place. And so to me, it starts with transparency on our end. It starts with how do we view failure, viewing it not as, it's something that happens to me. It's not who I am, right? It's an experience, not an identity. And then I think we've got to give them opportunities to fail and allow them to grow and learn and help them through that process in order to view it in a healthy way, rather than right now where I think failure is such a barrier to high performance because we view it in such an unhealthy way.
Awesome. Question number 2 that we have is related to kind of taking, basically, as he has phrased it, taking inventory of your players' mental capabilities or mental mindset prior to a season starting. And so this coach is asking, do you have any strategies or methods that you would recommend using for a high school coach to kind of gather inventory on the mental capacity of their players heading into a season?
So one of the things that we do here at South Dakota State, and it's, I wouldn't argue it's highly scientific. I think that I would argue like our best approach is we observe, right? I spend a lot of time observing our guys and trying to get to know them so that I can see where it is that they might be struggling. But one of the things that we do is we give them, I can't remember, it might be 10 or 12 questionnaire. It's a 10 or 12 questions. It's a questionnaire that gives me a sense of things like self-talk and confidence and so forth, and kind of where they're at. And not only does it give me then, we do it via, we just send it out by email. So it's just a Google form that they fill out, and it gives me all this data that kind of gives it to me as an aggregate. So I get the team kind of data, but then I get it for each player. And it just gives me a sense of like, okay, well, where is this guy's self-talk at? Where's his confidence level at? Does he have inabilities to focus? And then that gives me some ways in which I can attack some of the things that we need to get better at as a team, but also then on an individual level to get better. I'd be happy to, whoever this person may be, if they want to email me, I'd be happy to share that form with them in order for them to take their own inventory. And then that's where we go from there. We take that data, and that's how I design our curriculum, if you will, for that year, based upon some of the information that I get back and based upon things I observed, based upon things that might have happened in the off season, last season, all of this combined together. But that is not information that I typically share with the coach, right? So I think the thing you have to be careful of is, wow, I thought our starting quarterback was really confident, right? And now if you find out he's not, I don't think you should let that impact your decision-making. So never does a coach at South Dakota State come to me and say, hey, Kris, how's our left tackle feeling this week? Should I start him or not? I would never tell a coach about any conversations that I have with a player. There's that trust that takes place, other than if there's something that I think they need to know. Maybe it's if they're could harm themselves, or even if it's something I think could improve their coaching, right? Like every kid needs to be coached a little bit differently. So I just think you have to be careful about what you do with that information, because in my case, our coaches at SDSU don't have access to that information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Last question here. I kind of like this one, but it's kind of a loaded question. Coach asks, is there any strategies you have for mentally coaching parents?
Well, yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think that, as we know now in sport, the role that parents play is critical. And when we talk about having to rewire our brains, we're all born negative. But then we're brought into an environment. And so I was privileged, I would argue, as a kid, in which I was brought into an extremely positive environment. In my household, we weren't really allowed to talk negatively about ourselves. We weren't allowed to allow doubt to creep in. And it was a very positive environment. My parents always, no matter what happened at the end of the day, whether I scored a goal in hockey or not, or ran good in cross country or not, I was loved. And I think that, here at South Dakota State, we wear bracelets that say play loved on them. And that phrase means something, right? Every time I meet with the guys as a collective group, or even as a position, at the end, I always say, I love you. And I mean that, and our coaches mean that. And you hear our players say, I love you, and you hear them say it back to coaches. And that means something. And I think that's pretty rare in an environment that is obviously very masculine, right? In a very physical sport dealing with males. We're not used to being that vulnerable. And so I think part of that stems from my own upbringing, where no matter what, when I got home at the end of the day, sport wasn't my identity. It was something I did, but it's not who I am. And who I am was so much more than that. And my parents made sure to instill that in me, that I was a brother, I was a son. I was someone who obviously went to school. I was involved in the speech team. I was in the fall play. I played in the jazz band. I was so much more than simply an athlete. But where I got that from was in my upbringing. And so I knew that when I went home at the end of the day, I was going to be loved. And so I think part of it is when we do these mental strength training, I think you can do the same training for parents. So whether or not we do it together with the athletes, yeah, I think that's okay. Like when we do those worksheets that I talked about, I might send that worksheet home with the kid and say, fill this out at home with your parent, because oftentimes the self-talk that an athlete has is derived from how do their parents talk to them. So my self-talk tends to be pretty positive, but that's because my parents talk to me so positively. One of my daughter's friends said to her, she said, Eva, why is your mental health so strong? And she said, you've been in my house before. You know what my dad says. You know what it's like to be in my house. And so I think part of that, again, comes from what's that environment. And so we think that we have to train athletes. We really got to train parents too, in some cases, because that's where, even though we're wired negatively, we can do less rewiring, if you will, when they get to someone like me, if they have been, if they've lived in a positive environment that reinforces the right thing, that reinforces process over outcome and progress, right, over perfection. I think those things are really key in those moments, so that the athlete knows that, hey, when I fail, it's not my identity. It's something I experience. I'm still loved. And now I've start to develop that resilience to show back up rather than quit my sport or not go out for the sport in the first place. And so, we don't necessarily do that here at South Dakota State, but I remember when I first started, Coach Stig had me hop on a Zoom with all of our parents. And we talked to the parents about mental strength training and how they can be supportive of their son in this training process, and how they can help them even beyond just this training, in the sense that, being a Division I athlete's tough. It's hard. And when we're trying to win a national championship and playing at this level and playing the Missouri Valley Conference, it's difficult. And so they need to be able to lean into those people that give them the highest level of support. And obviously one of those people we would think that would be at that table, if you will, would be their parent or some legal guardian. And we sort of talked about, okay, here's how you can support them in those endeavors. And so I think, it starts with at home in many cases. And so if you can involve parents in that training, I think that would be most ideal. And maybe that's where someone like me does come in, right? Maybe you do bring in someone and say, yeah, that's worth the money. Let's train our athletes and let's get our parents to come to this as well at the same time.